Hello, and welcome to the Brutal Iron Gym podcast, where our goal is to cut through the BS and deliver the brutal truth about topics related to health and happiness. Today's podcast number 2255. The topic is training, and the title is Pros and Cons of SBD Days. What in the world is an SBD day? It stands for squat, bench, and deadlift. For my powerlifting clients and some strength-based clients, they will want to include a training day, where they perform a squat, bench, and deadlift all in one day. For powerlifters, one main argument for this is that their competitions are set up with exactly that structure. A powerlifting meet, so their competitions are called meets, M-E-E-T, so powerlifting meet is you perform your squat. You have 3 attempts in front of judges to squat the heaviest thing you can that day. You then have a rest time while other competitors and other weight classes are going. And then you would have bench. Again, you have 3 attempts in front of judges to bench the heaviest thing you can. Then you have a rest while other competitors are going. And then you finish with deadlifts. Again, 3 attempts to lift the heaviest thing you can. Then you add up your heaviest squat, bench, and deadlift, and you get what's called a total. And then per weight class, whoever has the highest total kind of wins that weight class. However, in powerlifting, you don't really compete against who's there that day. There is a ranking system where they take your body weight and then the amount of weight that you've lifted as your total, and they come up with what's called a DOTS score, D-O-T-S. And then you are ranked in the powerlifting world among anyone who's competed in powerlifting based on your DOTS score. So you might be able to win a meet that day, but maybe you don't have a great DOTS score, or vice versa. You have an awesome day, hit PRs all around, but there's some genetic freak there who has a great day and they beat you. So although it would look like you didn't quote unquote win that day, you don't compete against other people that are there. You're competing against your previous self, and you're wanting to improve your score over time. Now, I can say that, and if somebody wins that meet that day and they get like a medal, they're still going to feel pretty badass. So I understand when people are excited about if they win compared to the other people at a meet. But really, you're not competing against the other people that are there that day. You're competing against yourself over time. And then you compare yourself via a DOTS score to all people who are powerlifters, not just the ones who showed up at the competition that you're at. Now, that is a less exciting maybe way of looking at it. It's more pragmatic, and that's the way I look at things. I don't really give a crap if I would win a powerlifting meet if I didn't have the day that I intended to have, or I didn't beat my previous numbers. If in some way I didn't meet the expectations of the day, I don't care where I rank compared to other people. It was whether I met my expectations or not. That's how I do it. Doesn't mean everybody else has to do it. But that would be the reason why powerlifters would want to do a squat, bench, and deadlift all in one workout. I have strongman competitors who actually still like to do that, but they do a strongman variation, which is a squat, overhead press, and deadlift all in one workout. Their argument for that is that strongman competitions, they often compete in 5 events in one day, and there's going to be some combination of those 3 movements in those events, and usually some kind of mobile event as well, often referred to as a medley. But it's usually you have to statically move something really heavy using your legs, statically move something really heavy using your upper body, and then the rest of it's kind of chaos and who knows. Strongman competitions are not as predeterminedly structured as powerlifting meets. Powerlifting meets, no matter where you go, however when you do it, it's always squat, bench, and deadlift. Whereas strongman competitions, it can be a wide variety of events that they will choose for their grouping of 5 events for that competition. And then I also have athletes sometimes, and sports athletes, who are enticed by the idea of a squat, bench, deadlift day. So they'll argue for that case as well. I don't typically actually like squat, bench, and deadlift days, because what I want to do today, hence the title, is talk about the pros and cons of that type of training day. You can get all the pros in a format that doesn't have all the cons. So I usually do not like squat, bench, and deadlift days because I don't see there being a benefit to doing it. However, there are cases in which clients will argue for it and will do it, and if it makes them happy and it continues our progress, we'll do it for a period of time until I can argue them away from it. For most clients, you don't need to argue them out of it. If they like it and it's something that excites them, you can make it work. It's just, I wouldn't say that it's the optimal way to train, but it is a way to train. So there you go. What we'll do is we'll talk about the pros and cons. We're going to start with the pros. It would be easier for me to start with the cons because I get grumpy about it and I'm not a big fan of it. But I want to be mentally disciplined. So we're going to start with the pros, and I'm actually going to make a pretty solid case. I'm going to try to be devil's advocate to my own point of view. And what that would be, one of the main pros is that it does mimic a competition. You're going to get the feeling of doing the squat, bench, and then deadlift. And notably, what you'll notice is the bench is you're going to be more fatigued, and it'll feel different than if you were benching just like benching alone on its own day, because you just squatted. If somebody has any kind of external rotation issues in their shoulders, they're going to feel fatigued and stressed in their shoulders for the bench press. So they then have to learn how to bench press with that fatigue. And then deadlift, you're now going to be fatigued from having to do heavy squats and heavy benching, so you have to get used to deadlifting when fatigued. The benefit then is performing all three lifts in one day mimics that feeling that you would feel at a powerlifting meet. So they then can learn more accurately as to what they're going to feel at a meet and what performance they can expect. So if they deadlift totally fresh all the time, they might then set that as the expectation for what they can do at a meet. But yet at a meet, they're going to be deadlifting when fatigued, so they might not be able to match that expectation if they're always deadlifting totally fresh. So that's one main component for it. Another argument for SBD days is it covers the ways in which we progress strength. So you can get stronger by three main categories. Is you can increase technical proficiency, which means you can better display the strength you have. The second way is physical development, and that is just producing more strength potential. You get bigger tissues, stronger connective tissues, like bigger muscles. Your potential to be strong increases. And then mental. And that is, can we properly remember all of our cues or movement patterns when we're under the stress of a big heavy weight load? Do I feel confident when I get under a big weight? So those three areas are areas that impact strength. Think about physical is your physical capacity to produce strength. Technical is, can you actually display the strength you have? And mental is, can you not get in your own way? Can you learn to be confident and controlled under big heavy weights? Those are the three areas when we think of strength development. Again, it's technical, physical, and mental. The benefit of a squat, bench, and deadlift day is you get to focus on all three of those in one day. So you get tons of technique practice because you're doing the squat, bench, and deadlift. And typically when people do a squat, bench, and deadlift day once in their program, they will often structure the program where they have other days of the week where they'll still squat, bench, and deadlift. So they don't only squat, bench, and deadlift once a week, and that's their day. And then they do small movements and other things on other days. They typically will squat, bench, and deadlift in combination, squat 2 to 3 times a week, bench 2 to 3 times a week, and deadlift roughly 2. The deadlift is a little more aggressive on your nervous system, on your connective tissues, on your lower back. So that tends to be done a little less frequently than squats and benches. But they'll usually do those multiple times per week if they're utilizing a squat, bench, and deadlift day. So typically a program structure that includes a squat, bench, and deadlift day is going to include more technical practice at those main lifts. So you're going to increase your technical strength, your technical proficiency, so that does increase one component of overall strength. The second thing would be the physical component, is if you're doing squat, benches, and deadlifts more often, they are holistic, like stress every muscle in your body type movements. So you're going to increase the overall volume that you will be targeting all muscles of the body throughout the week. And that can increase physical development of muscle and connective tissue, assuming your nutrition, your sleep, and your stress management are all on point. So your recovery and adaptation capacity can be maximized through the support system, which is sleep, food, and stress management. So if those things are in place, and then you increase the frequency and total volume of stressing the tissues, then you're going to get increased tissue development. So a program that features squat, bench, and deadlifts, meaning you're squatting more often, benching more often, deadlifting more often, you have a greater total volume throughout the week of stressing muscle and connective tissues related to those movements, and that increases the potential to strengthen those tissues greater over time. Then the mental component is the more often you do something, the more confident you're going to get at it. So if you're squatting more often, benching more often, deadlifting more often, you're going to have greater exposure to those elements and the challenges and struggles of the elements. You're going to learn how to survive those, adapt to those, and thrive within them, and that can build your confidence. So the pros of a squat, bench, and deadlift day do make sense. They absolutely do. You are going to increase your technical proficiency, assuming, it's an assumption, and I'll clear that up here in a second. You're going to increase your physical development of muscle and connective tissues. Again, that's an assumption. I'll clean that up in a second. And then you're going to develop greater confidence. And again, that is an assumption. So the assumptions of these benefits are correct. The cons list is when the assumptions don't quite go the way that we assumed. And what I mean by that is the technical proficiency. Your technique only improves if you analyze the technique and try to make adjustments. If you just squat, it doesn't mean you're going to get better at squats. You might be making mistakes that if you're unaware of, you don't adjust for, you just then continuously repeat, you're not going to get better at technique. So just because you do something more doesn't mean you're going to get better at it. There is an enormous difference. So there's that phrase, practice makes perfect. Well, that is corrected. The correct phrase is perfect practice makes perfect. Meaning you have to practice with the intent to improve in order to create improvements. You would think anybody who's squatting, benching, and deadlifting often would make improvements. That is not always the case, especially if they do not have a coach or they do not have someone analyzing their technique. If they have a training partner, but the training partner is just as intelligent as they are or not as intelligent as they are, they're not going to be very helpful. The point of practicing is to analyze what am I not optimizing, and then how do I optimize that, and then continue to ask those questions every time you do the thing. So you'll find new things that you're not optimizing. You'll then have to implement new ways to optimize those, and then again you find new things you're not optimizing. It is very common, especially when I look at a social media, is I can't tell you the number of accounts. I mean, dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens and dozens, where I'll see somebody's videos and in 6 months, their squat looks just the same as it did today. Their heels lift up a little bit at the bottom, their ankles cave inward, the knees cave in, maybe they excessively hinge at the hips because they didn't take the time to strengthen their knees and their quads. You'll just see the same damn mistakes repeated like month after month after year, and you just feel bad for them. But just because somebody squat, benches, and deadlifts more often, it absolutely does not mean that their technique will improve. They have to be mindful of wanting to improve their technique and searching for ways to do that. So simply doing squat, bench, and deadlifts more often does not improve technique. That has to be an intentional goal. Physical development. The amount of stress that you place on tissues, connective tissues and muscle tissues, and then the central nervous system is incredibly high when you repeat large compound movements like squat, bench, and deadlift. You're taxing a lot of tissues. You're taxing the nervous system to quite a bit. It's very intense stress on the body. What this then means is if somebody is not properly nutritionally supported, meaning they're not eating the right amount of calories, they're not eating the right amount of protein, they're not distributing those equally throughout the day, and they're not maybe doing that on a continuous day-to-day basis. They have a good day here or there, bad day here or there. They're really only hitting calorie goals 4 out of 7 days, protein goals 4 out of 7 days. Their distribution's all off. They undereat during the day. They overeat at night. They're not even paying attention to hydration. If they don't have nutritional support, increasing the volume on these tissues in the nervous system will actually be detrimental. They will actually be worse off than if they were to separate the lifts into individual days. So the demand for the accuracy and consistency of nutrition and sleep and stress management becomes extremely high. There is way less room for error. So using squat, bench, and deadlift days, you have to be mindful that your nutrition and hydration, your sleep and your stress management are now under further scrutiny to be accurate and consistent. If somebody struggles at all with accuracy and consistency of nutrition, sleep, and stress management, they damn sure should not be using squat, bench, and deadlift days. And then also, the more often you repeat the large movements, the less time space in your training you have to target small weaknesses. If somebody has weak external rotators, so their knees cave in a little bit when they squat and deadlift, and that then causes their upper torso to pitch forward, they then excessively hinge at the hips, and it stalls out their lift midway through the range of motion on the concentric on the way up. They will not be better at the external rotators by just continuing to squat and deadlift more and more and more and more and more and more and more. When we do big lifts, the big muscles take the brunt of the effort. These small muscles, they get overloaded often and or they get understimulated. How can you be both? Well, when the big muscles are fresh and they can handle what we're doing, these small muscles do not get maximally stressed. Then as the big muscles start to fatigue and they crumble and they lose best positions, it dumps the stress immediately into the weakest muscles, which then become overloaded because the big muscles aren't doing their job. So now the weak muscles have to do their own job plus the job of the big muscles. So it tends to be this really hot and cold, this really high and low, where the weak muscles get very understimulated. Then as soon as the big ones fatigue, they get overstimulated. This leads to small weaknesses staying small weaknesses because of the understimulation, or small weaknesses can become chronic injuries because the tissues become overloaded. They then get tight and irritated, and then that causes a small elbow strain, small shoulder strain, something in your wrist is kind of bugging you, but it doesn't ever seem to go away. Those kind of issues start to come up. So repeating big lifts becomes a bigger risk because you're limiting development of smaller muscles and you're risking the health of the smaller muscles. And then the mental side of things. Just because you lift big things more often does not mean you're actually going to get more confident with them, especially if your nutrition, sleep, or stress management aren't optimized. You're not going to have optimal performance. You're going to have some days where you do well, some days where you don't. That leads to more uncertainty and lack of confidence. And then also the technical aspect. If you're not analyzing your technique and focusing on ways to improve your technique, you're just going to repeat the same mistakes over and over again. You're going to struggle with the same weights over time, and that'll actually decrease confidence over time. Another issue with the mental aspect of squat, bench, and deadlift days is people tend to overvalue the big lifts and they undervalue the smaller lifts. When you look at Louis Simmons, for example, one of the top 2 strength coaches in the history of ever, he talked about a strength pyramid. The base of a pyramid is what gives foundational strength to a pyramid. Also, the peak of a pyramid can only be as tall as the base is wide. So if you look at any pyramid, however wide the base is how tall the pyramid is. The peak of a pyramid is, in our example in this case, is your peak strength, your 1 rep max. The base is your general physical capacity for workload. If you just squat, bench, and deadlift and you don't do smaller movements, you don't do a lot of accessory movements, your capacity for workload does not get optimized and it does not get increased. So the base of the pyramid doesn't grow wider and wider and wider. Therefore, the peak of your strength eventually plateaus. So he had something he had athletes do called GPP, which is general physical preparedness, where they would do a bunch of like sled work, heavy carries. They would do body weight exercises. They do a bunch of accessories like dumbbell presses and tricep extensions and ab crunches and all these things. They would do all of these smaller movements, all the movements that aren't squat, bench, and deadlift. That equated to 80% of their programming. So Louis Simmons and many other strength coaches who follow a similar pattern and have had similar success all follow the 80-20 rule, or at least very close to it. Think of like Matt Wenning. He's another coach who does a lot of general physical movement. But our general physical capacity, the accessories of what we do outside of squat, bench, and deadlift should make up 80% of your training. When people do squat, bench, and deadlift, what they tend to do is it becomes the dominant work for their program. I mean, it would be generous to say it's 50-50. It often becomes like 80-20 where they do minimal warm-ups, they do the big heavy squat, bench, and deadlift, and they go home. So they tend to flip the 80-20 in the complete opposite way. And this leads to momentary increases in strength because the stimulus on the tissues is new. So the body will adapt to that newness to a point. And then once it reaches the capacity of the nutritional support, sleep support, and stress management support, it'll plateau. Often when people repeat the lifts more often, like initially, they'll get some kind of technique improvement. But then eventually that plateaus unless they're analyzing their technique and consistently aiming to find what needs to be optimized and how to optimize that. So again, that plateaus. And then the mental component is if you make initial progress, but then things start to slow down, you're going to lose confidence, you're going to get frustrated, you're going to think you're doing something wrong. That leads to uncertainty and questioning of the programming. So typically when people switch to squat, bench, and deadlift days, they get in this initial burst of improvement. And then it slows down, then it plateaus, and then it eventually regresses. If they don't accept the regression and they continue to push through heavy weights, they get acute injuries which turn into chronic injuries which turn into serious injuries. Typically, if you look at a multi-year career of athletes who use squat, bench, and deadlift days, you will find more athletes that get injuries and or mentally burn out. You will find some who do totally fine with squat, bench, and deadlift programs, but they tend to be fewer and further between, and they tend to be very controlled human beings, meaning on the day they're supposed to do just moderate weight load, they are really good at staying at a moderate weight load. They don't push up above what the program says, try heavier things just because it kind of sort of felt good that day, and then they end up crashing and burning later on. So the people who are successful with squat, bench, and deadlift programs stick to the freaking program. They don't cheat the program and try heavy things all the time because it's detrimental long term. Now, I tried to do a good job of trying to stay even in the pros and cons, but I definitely listed a lot more cons. But that is what I believe. It's what I've seen. I've trained people for 26 years. I have over 3,000 clients. I have helped people in powerlifting go from the first powerlifting meet ever to an elite total. I have tons of clients with elite totals. I have tons of clients who train other people. Over half of my clients are trainers. I have helped people set a bajillion state records, some national records. I have people who have, over 400 dots, over 500 dots. I have exceptionally high-level athletes. And I have people who are true beginners. And in all of that history, in all these cases, what I found is the best approach for programming is to separate the big lifts into their own days. So I have a squat day, a bench day, a deadlift day, then another press component day. So usually 4 days a week. So I usually recommend setting a program up where it's squat and then lower body accessories on one day, bench and upper body accessories on the second day. I usually promote them to take a rest day if they've done those 2 days in a row. And then we have deadlift and lower body accessories, then a press day, and upper body accessories, and then they take a day or two off. So usually we train 4 days a week. That is by far optimal, best for most people. If we do want to include a squat, bench, and deadlift day, there's two general formats. I don't usually like to have the squat, bench, and deadlift day be the max effort, just the heaviest thing they squat that week, the heaviest thing they bench that week, the heaviest deadlift they do that week. We're usually going to use those days to be moderate to moderately heavy. So it's heavy enough to get some technique feedback, but not so heavy that it destroys their body. So on that case, I usually have squat and bench on their first day, deadlift and full body accessories on the second day, take a rest day. Then we do a squat, bench, and deadlift day, and then we do a day of a bunch of small movements to work on small weaknesses. And then they take 2 days of rest. If they want to push the intensity of the squat, bench, and deadlift day, then we flip the order a little bit. So the first workout of the week would be the squat, bench, and deadlift day. Then they have the small movement weakness day. Then they have a rest day, then a squat and bench day, and then a deadlift and full body accessory day, then 2 days off. So those are the formats that I've used to where if we do want to include a squat, bench, and deadlift day, that's how I do it. So then they get to squat twice a week, bench twice a week, deadlift twice a week. And that is plenty of frequency enough, still allows a little bit of time for accessories. So that way we don't lose track of those small weaknesses and start to develop imbalance issues and small acute little issues that then eventually turn into chronic and large issues and maybe injuries. So that's the pros and cons list of a squat, bench, and deadlift day. And then if you do want to implement it, there are 2 suggestions on how to implement that into your training schedule. Great. Okay. If you would like any help with your programming, I do one-on-one coaching for nutrition and training. It's only $200 a month. I write out your training program. It's brand new every 4 weeks. I'll update it every week as needed. And the nutrition program is personalized 100% to you. I do weekly nutrition check-ins and update that along the way. Tons of education. And you also get free membership to our Patreon service, which involves weekly Q&As, tons of programming content. If you are a trainer, it will help a lot for training ideas and program creation. And then we also have a once a month, like a business development video on YouTube. So you get free access to all that if you're a one-on-one client. So you can check that out as well. Okay. If you have any questions, if you need anything, reach out. My email is brittleironjim@gmail.com. If you like the podcast, please share the podcast. If you like the podcast, you can consider donating to support the podcast. You can do that on the website directly, or you can actually buy your supplements through Nutricost.com. You can use the code BrittleIron10 for a 10% discount, and then 10% of whatever you spend gets kicked back to us as a commission. So you get great supplements at a great discount and give back to a great cost. So that's an option if you'd like to use that. And then if you like the information we share in the podcast, you can find more from us on our social media channels. You can find us and follow us on Instagram and YouTube under the name of Brittle Iron Gym. As always, I hope this was helpful, and thank you for listening.